Hello, everybody. A warm welcome from Berlin. This is another session of our AIOps Explained video series. And today we're going to talk about Runbook automation, and there was the topic application programmable interface. And today we have two gentlemen here, which are out of the development lab. They want to introduce themselves. With that, I hand over to Sebastian.
Hey, hello everybody. This is Sebastian Wegmann. I'm the Runbook Automation lead architect for the development that we're doing here. I'm today brought with me Jonathan. Jonathan, take it away.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a software developer at IBM Runbook Automation, and I'm going to show you a demo about the API uses we'll discuss in this session.
Thank you. To introduce the topic overall, this is the feature collection of the Cloud Pak for Watson AIOps. So we do have on the left side several channels to ingest data into the Cloud Pak for Watson AIOps. So events, metrics, logs, topology data, but also third-party information. For example, some information about a CMDB, customer databases, all these kind of things which are important to create a very powerful operations environment. And the core topic is here, of course, collect as much data as possible and reduce that to a significant portion. Within the event management, we say we need the actionable events. So therefore, we do a noise reduction concept. And after the noise reduction concept, we have achieved to reduce the importing event stream to something that is manageable. So for example, we do have a customer here in Germany who's receiving 2 million events a day, and with the noise reduction capabilities of the Cloud Pak for Watson AIOps, they are reducing that to a mere few dozens where they actually have to do something about it. And that's what it is in operations. First, detect where do we have a problem in our environment. And after we know we do have a problem, then try to identify as quick as possible what is the problem. And after you know what is the problem, then actually do something about it. And the actually do something about it, this is something we do have the Runbook automation capability for, because the Runbook automation capability is something that is a kind of pre-built procedure to rectify a known problem. And that's very handy, because with that you have the capability of capturing domain knowledge. For example, you have very seasoned site reliability engineers and they want to improve the level of automation. So therefore, they implement procedures to rectify known problems. Those can be provided within Runbook automation, for example, in a manual way. So just a click-through procedure, and at the end, you have hopefully the problem resolved, or a partial automated approach, which uses automated in-between steps. So for example, pre-built scripts that can be pushed towards the backend systems, do some kind of tricks, forward the feedback that comes from the command line, and then do something in the backends. As well as if you do have a procedure that fully works autonomous in the background, then this is something we can turn on completely automated. So manual, semi-automated, and fully automated runbooks are capabilities that we do provide within Runbook automation. And the Runbook automation is here on the right side. This is what we're talking about today. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Sebastian, please.
Thank you, Fred. As we are talking about what Runbook automation can do for you in the sense of resolving the issues or resolving the alerts and situations that are coming in, one of the tools that is at your disposal with Runbooks is the Runbook API. You might already have some ideas for what you can use these APIs, but I'm just going to go over a few of the more traditional and more common use cases. There are so many possibilities you can do with an API. It's always important to see some examples and then expand on them yourself to do the solution that you actually want to achieve in the end. On this short list, we have the first item, which is export and import of data, a very common scenario that we see from a lot of clients, and it ties into migration from one system to another. You have, for example, a test server, you are developing some great assets there, and now you want to move on to production, and obviously you don't want to copy the assets that you have created one by one, hand by hand, typing them using control copy, using control paste. You want to have some kind of script program or anything else that does these things for you. And after I have done my part on this video, we will have Jonathan, who will deep dive into one of such a scenario. We will show you how this can be done and how cool it can be if you can do this in an efficient way. But in order to do that, your application needs to have the proper APIs exposed. Otherwise, you cannot programmatically extract the data. The most wide integration scenario with other tools through the API, it's a topic where you can do a lot of different things. And good tools that you see around, that you have probably used or will be probably using in your own environments, typically do have a good API so they can integrate with other tools. So if you take a look at software like GitHub, for example, a very common tool to manage your code repositories, GitHub has loads of APIs so that other tools can integrate them. And a lot of the tools that you know for GitHub, like hooks and other tools that make your repository truly integrated with things like your CI/CD pipeline, they all build on the common API. This is especially important if you have other tools that want to do something with your Runbook data or want to kick off jobs inside Runbook Automation. So you are not bound to just the graphical user interface that we ship, but you can also use this API interface to have other tools calling it, have your scripting calling it, and do stuff in the system. Another nice thing with the API is that you have the complete freedom of choosing your data formats, your outputs. You can craft a lot of commands in that, and those commands can do a lot of things that the default user interface in your browser will maybe not offer to you. You have more control and you can choose exactly the kind of data that you want. And I will have a short example on that just in a few minutes. Another thing that is also often seen as a use case for the API is the creation of reports and statistics. So if you're pulling data from the system and you can control which kind of output you want, so you're just pulling the data you're naturally interested in, and you do that on a regular basis, you have a very nice collection of data that you can use to create your own reports, to create your own graphs, your charts, do something like the dashboarding. If you have some software running that can create a graph or a dashboard out of the raw data that you have. This is something that's often something that a operations team is asked to provide to, for example, their management, to say, you know, we want to see how many runbooks are you running? How much are you using the software? Is it really worth it for us to use that? And creating a report like that is something that you can use to prove how much you are actually using a specific system. These are just a few of the use cases. Of course, there are many, many more. This is just to give you a few ideas and pointers on where to start your journey with the Runbook Service API. We do have our API completely documented on this link in the NOI documentation. There will be a link coming up soon for the Watson AIOps documentation as well. And in addition to that, you will see this rendered UI that's created with Swagger, a tool commonly used to document APIs. And the same UI is also available directly on your system, where you can directly interact with the system and not just read the documentation, but directly do something, which is a very nice way to get started with the API, to understand it, learn a little bit more before you go into the actual programming in a language that you have chosen in the end. Okay, as you can see, I jumped right into the IBM Docs page, where you can see the Net Collaboration Insight documentation, and I navigated to the Swagger document for the IBM Runbook Automation API. There are other APIs available as well, as you can see, event management, metric manager, probable cause, and topology. But I'm going to focus on just the Runbook Automation API and give you a short introduction about how to read and understand those Swagger documents. So first off, we do have a list of what is called API endpoints. So each of those endpoints does a specific thing. You can see the description right after the endpoints. An HTTP GET request on /runbooks will get you all of the runbooks. So this is one to retrieve data. If you take a look, for example, at this one here, it's an HTTP delete on Runbooks with a specific Runbook ID, and it's used to delete a Runbook. So you can see the HTTP method, the path endpoint, and a short description right here in the overview. The main parts for the Runbooks API are managing Runbook objects. That's retrieving Runbooks, creating new ones, changing them and deleting them. The Runbook instance API, which is get the execution records, which are called Runbook instances for what you have done in the system. You can create a new one. So that's the same thing as running a Runbook. And with the patch route, you can do something after you started it. So proceed to a next step and close out the Runbook instance with a status once you finished it. For the triggers integration, we do have the trigger API. And for managing your configuration, like setting up the system for the group feature or the approvals feature, you have the configuration API. There are a few other calls. One thing I wanted to highlight is our status call. So that can be a good call to use when you have something like a status monitor running. If you regularly call this call here, you would get output, and that's like Swagger works like this here. So this is an example value in the black box, and you can switch between an example that we have provided and the schema. So the schema is always a JSON schema, and you can see here that the response status will always consist of the following data. We'll always have the status for the Runbook service, for the database, for the automation service, and then a section about the connections. And we support 4 different connections right now: the AWX connection for Ansible Tower, the BigFix connection, the Impact connection for setting up the triggers, and the script connection for running SSH automations. For all these properties, you also see that they have a data format defined. And in that case, the data format is an integer. So it's a number. Without fractions, it has to be a rounded number, and it can be 0, 1, or 2. And what does that mean, 0, 1, or 2? Well, that's defined here. We have the description here. We try to be as thorough as possible to give you a really good start in understanding the API. And we see for every service, a 0 indicates a good status, a 1 indicates an error, and a 2 indicates that the service is not part of the deployment. So there are some deployments where it's not part of the deployment. And for the connections, the 2 indicates that the connection is not configured. So if I go back to the example where you provided here, in this case, it would mean all the zeros, everything's working fine. 1 would mean an error, and we see an error here in the error list. So it would mean, okay, somebody defined the BigFix connection, but they're obviously wrong credentials, and the Impact connection has not been defined, so it's disabled for the moment. And with this information, you can basically start, if you would want to write an application that interacts with the API, you could basically see what you're going to expect as the output, and you can use that schema to start writing your own application and say, okay, I know there will always be an RBS. There will always be a DB field. I can rely on this being an integer, so it won't be a random string or something like that. And that helps you crafting your own scripting or your own application. This here, as it is the IBM documentation, is for the documentation purposes only. But as I said before, this is also running on your local system. So I have one system prepared here with my own setup. I have already provided authorization keys here. So for this environment, I have an API key created. That means I'm authorized to use all these commands. As a short example, I will check for my runbooks which of the runbooks have 0 tags. And for one of those runbooks, I will want to add a tag because maybe that's the rule in my environment. I agreed with my colleagues that every runbook must have at least 1 tag, so it's more easily findable. So at first, I go to get runbooks to get all of the runbooks. There are a lot of parameters here. For now, I'm just interested in the latest ones, and I'm interested in, for the fields, their Runbook ID and the tags. So the Runbook ID to identify them, and the tags to see which ones don't have any. So I hit execute here. The call returns. I can use the curl to redo it for scripting. That's very nice if you are already using curl for quite a lot of other things. This will come very natural to you. I can also see the URL where the query parameters have been encoded into the URL query language, and I see my output here. So in this environment, you can see there are a lot of runbooks. And if I hadn't restricted the data to just the data that I wanted, I would have a huge amount of data. But like this is actually quite easily readable. I have the Runbook ID I'm interested in, and I see here are some culprits right away. They don't have a tag defined. So I'm going to use one of those, use the Runbook ID and give it one. So I'm going to go to the patch Runbook because I want to change an existing asset. So for patching, you can see in this description, there are a lot of things I can change. We also provided you some examples right away. You can get started very quickly by reading those. There are some additional input rules that make sure that things you enter are actually making sense. I don't want to directly publish a new version. For now, I just want to edit the draft of the Runbook. I'm putting in the ID for the values to change. I only want to do a change in the tags. And I'm going to say, I'm going to do a to-do tag in there. So it means basically just as a reminder that this Runbook needs to have a meaningful tag in the future. And what I can do now, I just execute this request here. I'm getting the response that it worked okay. The 200 return code is indicating that for me. And now I'm going back to retrieve just that Runbook. That's a single one. Again, I'm putting in the Runbook ID. I want to get the draft, which is always version 0. And I want to see what my tags are looking right now. And as you can see in the response body, I just get just the data that I want. I see now it has the to-do tag. So my previous operation was successful. And if I call the first call again to get all of the Runbooks, I can see the change not here because I have chosen the latest Runbook, but I could have chosen the draft instead. When I look at the draft, I see that there's now one with a to-do tag. This small example just shows you how you can interact with the API, use it to just view the data you want and do a lot of different things. So if you wanted to create a report of all the Runbooks that don't have any tag, you can, out of this list, quite quickly extract all the Runbook IDs and have a comprehensive list of Runbooks that still need a tag to fulfill the imaginary rule that I just set up that every Runbook has to have at least one tag. With this being covered, I would hand over to Jonathan to get away from a somewhat artificial example that I just presented here for demonstration purposes to something that a customer can and would do in a real environment in a real example. So Jonathan, take it away, please.
Thank you, Sebastian. I'm now in Netcool Operations Insight, and as you can see here, we see the example runbook on importing runbooks from an existing runbook deployment. And I'm now going to show you this exact use case based on the runbook which we provided here. I'm going to run this runbook. Now you can see on the right there are several parameters which I'm not going to fill out at the moment, but just start the runbook with a button on the top right. So there's some general descriptions and disclaimers on this runbook, which I'll just skip for the moment. I need to start finding the base URL of the source from where I want to export my runbooks. So as this is a Netcool Operations Insight environment, I have to look at the second section here. And as you can see, you can derive the base URL of the source, in this case, from the URL which you can see in your browser bar. And this is what I'm going to do. And then I need to append this path, which is /API/v1/RBA. And once I've updated the URL here, I click Update Parameters at the top right. Now I go to the second step, which now tells me to get the base URL of the target environment. I want to migrate my runbooks from this NOI environment to a Watson AIOps environment. So I again go to the URL of the UI, which is used for Watson AIOps, and I'll copy again the host name from here and paste it to the target URL parameter on the right. Now again, I have to append a path, which is in this case AIOps manager RBA v1. And again, I click on update parameters and go to the next step. Now I have to find out the authentication and enter it on the right. Again, I look for the deployment which I'm using, which in this case is the instructions for deployments other than Watson AIOps. And here I have to go to administration. Since I run this runbook in this instance of Netcool Operations Insight, I'll just right-click here on integration with other systems and click on open a new tab to not close the window I'm currently looking at with the Runbook. So I'll go to the newly opened tab, click on the API keys tab and generate a new API key. I have to make sure that the checkbox for Runbook API is checked here. All the other checkboxes are technically not necessary, but I'll just leave them in this case. So I click on generate here. This is now the API key name, and this is the API key password, which is start out at the moment. First, copy the name to the parameter section here, and I'll just click on this icon to make it visible. And then I'm also going to copy the password to the source authentication method while using a colon to separate them. And what I need to do is this needs to be the curl header, which is written here. So what I need to change is I need to put everything here in quotes and then type -u at the front. And again, I click on update parameters and go to the next step. Now I need to do the same with the target authentication. It's a bit more complicated. Now in the next step, I need to construct the target authentication. In the section for Cloud Pak for Watson AIOps, I see this instruction, which is used to create the authentication header for Watson AIOps. So I'm going to copy it and paste it in a new shell session. You see it has two placeholders here. One is the username and the other one is the API key value. To get the API key value, I switch to Watson AIOps UI. Here in the top right, go to Profile and Settings. Again, in the top right, click on API key and select Generate New Key. At this point, you should make sure that the old key, which was already configured, is not used anymore. In my case, I'm sure that this is the case, and I can just go ahead and click Generate. And now I'm getting presented an API key. So I just show it, copy it over to my shell command, and here I'm going to paste it at the place where the placeholder was before. Just run the command, and it gives me the authentication header, which I can use in my Runbook. And I click on update parameters down here on next step. At this point, the Runbook suggests that I may want to set a Runbook ID for exporting and importing just a single Runbook. I don't want to do this, so I just leave this source single Runbook ID parameter empty.
So what's the effect of leaving that? Is it a wildcard?
Yeah, so if you leave it empty, then all the Runbooks will be exported. Now in the next step, I get a command which I can use to verify that all the information I entered here are correct. So I'm going to copy this command into my shell session, and I get a response from the status call, which tells me the credentials and the base URL I entered are correct. If this wasn't the case, then this step would also give me some instructions on how to debug and find out what's wrong. But since this works, I'm going to go to the next step, which is testing the same connectivity for the target credentials. So I'm going to copy this command again into my shell session. And again, this also works. So I'm going to the next step. And now finally, this is the command for exporting the Runbook from my NOI environment, which I'm going to copy, paste it in my session. It's now exported all the Runbooks from this NOI deployment into this file called exported_runbooks.json. Now in the next step, I get some special instructions on how to work with the exported Runbooks.json file in case file is too big, since there's an import limit of 1 megabyte, and if I exported more than one megabyte, I would need to split up the exported Runbooks.json file into several smaller files to not violate this upload limit. This is not the case, so I can just go ahead with the next step. Now I'm presented the command to import these formerly exported Runbooks again. I'm going to copy this command and paste it in my shell session. And I get a lot of output, which is the data of the Runbooks, which I imported in the Cloud Pak for Watson AIOps deployment. I'm going to navigate to the Cloud Pak for Watson AIOps deployment now to verify my Runbook can be found there. I go to Automations and Runbooks, and I can see all the Runbooks which formerly were on the other deployment now also on this deployment.
With all the lovely namings.
Yeah, best namings. When I go back to the runbook, I have some more steps for cleaning up. So I click on next step here, and I'm instructed to delete the API keys again in case I don't want to use them anymore for security reasons, so they cannot be used for other unintended uses. So in this case, I go back to my tab with the API key management on NOI here and delete the API key I just created. Likewise, now I'm going in the next step, which tells me to do the same for Watson AIOps. I go to the Watson AIOps UI, go to the profile and settings again, and under API key, I choose revoke current key and confirm. And now this key is revoked as well. This is important to do because in the runbook, I obviously put all the credentials in the parameters, and by deleting the API keys again, I can make sure that no one can use the data from this runbook to do any task on the API.
And because the keys are unique, I don't need to blur out anything because they can't be revoked anyway.
Yeah, this is correct.
Nice, thank you.
This concludes my demo. Thanks.
Really well done. This is a lengthy runbook in the example runbook library, but it's a very useful one. And we already have several business partners who are using these kind of runbook procedure to import export, so it's quite handy for bulk export imports as well as for individual ones. So we do have a customer who is having something like 3,000 runbooks at a time at the moment. I think that's the biggest, isn't it?
Yes, I think that's the biggest I'm aware of right now. And with such a number, of course, you also need to do the one step which I skipped in this example because my example wasn't that big, where I have to split the files and create smaller chunks of files to make sure they can be imported one by one and not violate the 1 megabyte limit.
Absolutely. And we just need to add that the Cloud Pak for Watson AIOps sample, as we have shown it here, is using the Cloud Pak for Watson AIOps version 3.3, which is coming and has not been released by now. I think it's also applicable to export data from the previous Runbook Automation PD version into an NOI version. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It also includes some instructions on how to get to the base URL when you're using IBM Runbook Automation private deployment. So this should also work.
Very good. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Sebastian. With that, we conclude today's video. We have seen how to create the API keys, the authentication pieces. We have talked about how to construct the URLs, how to use that on command line, where the data needs to be retrieved to construct all these various data sets. We've talked about documentation, where to find all these pieces documented, and this then used on a use case to migrate existing runbooks from one system into another system. So for example, this can be a development system that is used to actually develop stuff. And once they are mature enough, then this can be exported into a production environment. So this would be the normal use case for this kind of procedure. I guess this can be more put into scripted environments, so you don't need to construct all these bits and pieces each time, but very useful, very handy. And for that, I really like to thank you for your attention, for your time to prepare all this use case. And I thank you, the audience, for your attention today. And we are going to conclude this video for today. We are looking forward to have another Runbook automation video, which is looking into using runbooks in conjunction with multiple sources. So for example, if you do have multiple object servers you want to connect to, and this is something we call multi-sourced, and this is something we are preparing at the moment. So watch this space. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.